A gute Woche. Rebbe soll gesund sein, began the Farbrengen today, that in Torah we find in Yonim Kloliyim, general things, and in Yonim Protiyim, meaning detailed things. Benegea, what is negea to what the Rebbe is discussing, is today is in general Shabbos. We have many Shabbosim throughout the year. Some of the Shabbosim throughout the year are also Shabbos Mevorchim. So today is Shabbos Mevorchim, and in addition to that, every Shabbos Mevorchim has its specialty, the fact that it is the Shabbos Mevorchim of a special month. And Benegea to us today, it is the Shabbos Mevorchim of the month of Av. Every Inyan in Torah, the Rebbe continues, is for us to derive a lesson from it. Especially based on the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov teaches us that anything a Yid comes into contact with is an Inyan of Ashgacha Pratis. Therefore, it is the fact that it is Shabbos Mevorchim, and Shabbos Mevorchim of, there's a lesson which we can derive from that, B'negeya, our daily Avodah. Now here the Rebbe got into explaining that Bichlal, in the days of the Beis HaMikdash, there was more a stress for Mainse, for deed, act, than it is today. And this is B'negeya Korbanos. In the times of the Beis HaMikdash, there was the Inyan of being physically Makriv Korbanos constantly. Today, we do not have that. All we have is tefillos, davening, and davening is not an Inyan where we perform an act, it's something which we do through dibur. And we are told that this dibur, tefillah, b'mokem korbanos tiknum, it takes the place of a korban. But it doesn't mean that it necessarily is a korban. On the other hand, at the times of the Beis HaMikdash, they were actively makriv korban. And getting into the Inyan of Churban, which is negea to the month of Av, which now we are in the time of Bein HaMetzarim, the Rebbe explained that though we find that after the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, and even after the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, we find that a large number of Yidden remained living in Eretz Yisrael. So what is the pshat? We say Golus. Golus means that we were driven out of Eretz Yisrael, as the Rebbe kept on stressing, Mipnei Chato'einu. Due to our sins, Golinu me'artzeinu, we were put into exile, we went into Golus. Here we find that a large number of Yidden remained in Eretz Yisrael even after the Churban, and the same applied in both Batei Mikdash, say after the first Beis HaMikdash and say after the second Beis HaMikdash. So the Rebbe is explaining that after each of the Churban Habayis, after each one of them, Eretz Yisrael went into Golus. The country Taka remained a country. The Yidden may have remained physically in Eretz Yisrael. Let me use the expression we find, Ish tachas gafnoi v'ish tachas teinosoi. When Yidden were in Eretz Yisrael, they were all living, each one under his vineyard or under his date tree. The Rebbe says the Geffen and the Te'ena, the trees became different trees. In other words, the country in itself became into a situation of Golus. It is no longer the same Eretz Yisrael as it was before. Spiritually, Eretz Yisrael was a high madrege, a high level of Kedusha. Once it came to the Churban Habayis, though a large number of Yidden Taka remained in Eretz Yisrael and physically did not leave the country, they were in Eretz Yisrael, however they were also in Golus. Why? Because the entire country went into Golus. Memela, our Avodah now is to rectify that inyan. Why do we have to stress, particularly in these days? We have to rectify the Mipnei Chato'einu. Memela, this will take care of the Golinu Ma'artzeinu, and this is primarily in these days, in the days when we are benching the month of Av. And here the Rebbe went into a lengthy Chassidish explanation, B'negeya the inyan of Zman U'Mokim. That explain the Chassidus that Zman U'Mokim, time and place, time and space, well, all of this was also created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Rebbe explained that every rega, every moment, in every situation we are in, all of this comes as a continuation of the very first moment which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created. Memela, in every moment which we have a shaychus to, every rega has a shaychus to the first rega, which this comes, as the expression of Chassidus goes, from Hachshava Hakduma Da'ak, which is a high level in the Rabbeinu Shalom, a high level in Sfiras. So Memela, we have to realize how important every second is, and every minute has to be utilized properly. And here the Rebbe referred to as a famous story that a chassid once came to the Tzemach Tzedek and asked the Tzemach Tzedek, consulted the Tzemach Tzedek that he wanted to move to Eretz Yisrael. So the Tzemach Tzedek responded to him, and he told him in Yiddish, Mach da Eretz Yisrael. We know what Eretz Yisrael stands for. Eretz Yisrael stands for a high spiritual uplifting. So the Tzemach Tzedek told him what Eretz Yisrael really stands for. You go and accomplish it here. The Rebbe said, whatever avodah we are talking about, whether we're talking about the avodah of Machdar Eretz Yisrael, or we're talking about different levels in avodah, all the avodas that pertain to this time of the year that have a shaychus to Shabbos Mevorchim of, we have to know to really utilize all of these avodas and utilize every moment, because every moment is extremely dear. Every rega of Zman, because every rega is tied with the first rega which was created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and this goes, as just mentioned, this is tied in with Machshava Akduma De'ak. This, the Rebbe says, is a general introduction to the entire concept of. However, if we go a little more specific, we have to look at today's Sedra. And not only the Sedra, but a Yid derives his lessons from the shiurim which he learns on that day. And to us, what are the primary shiurim which we learn? Is the inyanim of the shiurim of Chitas. The Rebbe mentions that at times, it's a famous expression, the Chazarah can dress himself up in a zaydene zupetze. In other words, the Chazarah puts on a zaydene kapote. In other words, he portrays to be a real frumme Yid. The Rebbe keeps on referring to the Chazarah, the kluginker, the smart one. So Mamela, he's the smart one, so he's trying to convince people to catch him and get him involved to do his way. So he tries all different ways. So he may as well also try by getting dressed in a zaydene zupetze. The Rebbe says that the Chazarah who gets dressed in a zaydene zupetze is going to suggest to people and say, how can you learn Chitas? Chitas means also learning the Shir Tanya. You don't understand what you're learning in Tanya. So it's not befitting, it's not for the covet of the Alter Rebbe to learn in his Sefer at the time you're not understanding his Sefer. So the Rebbe says, but we know this is totally wrong. True. B'negei birchas ha-Torah, when we're learning Torah Shebal Peh, we can only make birchas ha-Torah if we understand what we're learning. But at the same token, the Rebbe says, if the Frierdiker Rebbe was the one who instituted, Nasi Dereinu, instituted this concept that we have to learn shiurim of Chitas on a daily basis, the Chitas, in other words, now that we're talking about Tanya, has a shaychus to each and every Yid, and there's no one that could say that he has no shaychus to it. So Mamela, we derive our lessons, this Rebbe was like kind of a Maimer HaMuzga. We derive our Horoes from the shiurim and Torah that have a shaychus to the days that we are standing in. Today's Sedra is the Parsha of Matos-Masei. The Rebbe stressed today, spoke about it already previous occasions. When we have two Sedras combined, it's not two separate Sedras. They really become one Sedra. In fact, it's the one who has the Aliyah of Revi. He makes the first bracha in Parshas Matos, and the second bracha, which he makes on the closing of the laning, this he makes when it's already read, Parshas Masei. Furthermore, the Rebbe says, if we are learning Parshas Masei today, because today is Shabbos, so today's Parsha is Shvi. So what do we learn? We learn Shvi is only in Parshas Masei. So what shaychus does Parshas Masei have to Parshas Matos? Today we're learning Parshas Masei in the shiurim of Chitas. Rebbe says, if we look into the Chumash, we will see Shvi kishehem mechubarin. When is it Shvi? When both Sedras are together. So it's again a reminder that we are in a week when both Sedras are combined. Furthermore, the Rebbe says, if we look into our calendar, and it's customary by Yidden that Yidden always refer to a calendar tells us all the various Jewish customs, a calendar tells us when a Jewish mother and daughter have to tzin Shabbos licht. So Mamela, we always have to refer to a calendar. So if we look into the calendar, we see that this week is Shabbos, Pashas, Matos-Masei. It's 2 circles. What is the taich of Masei? Masei means to travel, a journey. That's the idea of Masei. What shayches does it have to us? What kind of lesson can we derive from this inyan of Masei? Obviously, the Rebbe says, Masei is a contradiction to the concept of Shabbos. Shabbos, we are resting on one place. Shabbos, we're not traveling. Here we say that there's an inyan of Masei, which means a journey, and this has a shayches to the Shabbos. The Rebbe says, what is the shayches? So here the Rebbe referred to those Yid who have traveled, who went through an inyan of Masei, a journey, to come and spend here Shabbos. Why are they coming to spend here Shabbos? Because perhaps they will be here, so they will hear a Hasidic Avot, and they will be in the Daladamis, as the Rebbe keeps on referring, of the Frierdiker Rebbe, which is the Beis HaMedrash of the Frierdiker Rebbe, where he davened and learned for the last 10 years of his life. Chaim Chayosei Ba'al Medain, as the Rebbe uses the expression of his years on this world. Memela people were willing to go through wandering, which is an inyan of Masei. And the expression in the Gemara debates, for whom is it harder to wander? For a male or for a female? The Gemara uses the expression Tiltula de Gavre or Tiltula de Nashe. And still these people overlooked everything, and they've gone through Valgeren sich, as the Rebbe used the expression. We wander in order to be here at Shabbos. Mamela, this is the lesson which we have to derive. In other words, we have to appreciate these individuals and look up to them, and not like those that prefer staying at home. And what will they do when they stay at home? They will eat a good kugel, and then they will go to sleep, and they will fulfill Shina b'Shabbos Tainug. And what kind of sleep, the Rebbe says? From early Shabbos afternoon until the end of the entire Shabbos afternoon, and way deep into Raiva the Raiva, into the time of Shalosh Yudos. What's going to be? And the end of Raiva the Raiva. And what's going to be with Mincha, and what's going to be with Kriyas HaTorah? We have to do all of this on Shabbos afternoon. So the Rebbe says they're going to do it, but they're going to do it like in a format of a dream. The Rebbe referred to a Maimer in Torah from the Alter Rebbe, where Alter Rebbe explains that at times people could be doing things, and it's in a level of a Yinu Kechayilmim. They're really not there, they're in a dream. It's not really going through these inyanim. The Rebbe says these individuals are the same. So, and if they're sleeping, or they're sleeping with open eyes, which is all the same idea. And Memela, when we have people, it seems like there was a group that came in here to spend Shabbos here, a group from Toronto. And Memela, when we have these people that have overlooked all of these inyanim of being home Shabbos and being at their own convenience and at their own table, and nonetheless have gone through an inyan of Masei, it is something which is praiseworthy, something which has to be looked up to. And particularly, the Rebbe mentioned also in praise those people that were involved in heading the group and bringing the group, and it's something which is very extremely praiseworthy. This is B'negei Masei. What is the lesson that we derive from the combination of Matos and Masei? So here the Rebbe says, what's the taich of Matos? Mato means a stick. It means a tribe, it also means a stick. A stick comes from a piece of wood. Especially in those days, the Rebbe said, all sticks were made from wood. What does it mean spiritually? Spiritually, the concept of Matos reflects an idea of firmness. In other words, when we say a person is firm and will not bend over, it lets itself be explained with the idea of a mato. What is the shayches of Matos and Masei? Rebbe is explaining as follows. At times a person may be in a position of a Masei. What is the pshat? He's traveling. He's traveling. He's not at his own table. And he's a guest by somebody else. And he's a guest at someone else's home. And the question arises, could he eat everything that is being served, or can't he? And at times he's in a situation where fish he could eat, however meat he can't eat. So the individual, in other words the guest, will say to himself, being that this person is his host, and he's going out of his way to take care of him so nicely, how can he go ahead and refuse him when he's treating him to such delicious foods? I say that he go ahead and explain him that these are foods which he usually doesn't eat because it's not in the proper standard of kashrus. He feels that he would be doing something unethical to go ahead and explain it to his host, such type of an idea. So this is the lesson which we derive from this week's Sedra. There's a combination of Matos and Masei. In other words, this comes to tell us that even when we are in a position of Masei, in other words, we are on a journey, we're traveling, we're not at our own table. So here the Torah also tells us that we shouldn't overlook on things. We shouldn't say that being that we are traveling it's different, and especially we don't want to make the host feel uncomfortable, and therefore we can't refuse him, and he put this to the table, we have to eat it, and so forth. The Torah tells us no, matos, even in Masei, even when we are traveling, we have to be matos, we have to be firm, and not bend on any inyan which is negei kashrus and which is negei Yiddishkeit. And ultimately the Rebbe says, when we will act in such a way, then the person whose guest we are, our host, will also appreciate such type of an attitude, and we will explain it to him. And he says, explain it to him. Let him also understand your reason, not just do things and don't let him understand, keep him in the blind. Tell him why taki you're not eating this meichel, or why taki you're not eating another meichel. Explain it to him that these are foods which, al pi halacha, you cannot eat, and you will not eat. And then ultimately what will be the result of such type of an attitude, that the person who is your host will appreciate it, and he too will become upgraded, and he too will improve his own attitude when he will see you acting that way. The Rebbe says this lesson we derive when Matos and Masei is a combination. Even though there are years where Matos and Masei are not read together, so from the years when Matos-Masei is read together, we derive this strength, and we carry it over even to the other years when Matos and Masei is read separate. And by doing so, the Rebbe concluded, Masei means traveling, journey. A Yid is constantly in a journey, because a Yid always is instructed that he has to be going mechayil al chayil, from level to level higher in serving the Rebishter. So by being in such an attitude of matos, of firmness, this will lead us to Masei, that we will constantly be going on masois. In other words, we will not bend over on any inyanim of Yiddishkeit, but we will be firm in a format of mata. We will be going. This will lead us to going constantly and constantly higher and higher, mechayil al chayil, and all of the masois, until we'll be able to reach real high madrigas, real high levels. Talking about this inyan, the Rebbe also mentioned that the inyan of firmness of a person being so stubborn and firm, this is only when we're talking b'negei Yiddishkeit, b'negei following the Shulchan Aruch, following the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. However, when we're talking about attitude of one person to another, here the attitude of firmness is not an appreciated attitude. On the contrary, here we have to be soft and acceptable one to another, and warm one to another, in no way an inyan of matter. Mashenkin, when we're talking about an inyanim of Yiddishkeit, inyanim of Shulchan Aruch, and inyanim of fulfilling the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in terms of not bending over, not leaning away, going away from the Shulchan Aruch and from the wish of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, here we have to be firm in the sense of a matter. Later in the Farbrengen, as it's customary, the Rebbe learns an inyan in Rashi. Week Sedra also refers to an inyan in the comments of his father, Lekutei Levi Yitzchak, and also a Rambam. And now, today, it's interesting. We have the Rambam of the daily Shir in the Rambam. We also know that during the 3 weeks, the Rebbe wants that we should learn the Rambam of Hilchas Beis HaBchira, these inyanim that have a shaychus to the Beis HaMikdash. In today's Shir and Rambam, those that learn 3 Perakim a day, it's a combination. It's the halachas of Beis HaBchira, Perek Beis, Gimel, and Dalet. So the Rebbe spoke one inyan, but actually, by doing this, he spoke the inyan in the Rambam, as well as talking an inyan in the Rambam Hilchas Beis HaBchira, which is usually a practice during the 3 weeks. And also explaining a Mishnah in the Pirkei Avos. The Rashi, which the Rebbe explained, it's customary last couple of months that the Rebbe asks that questions in Rashi should be raised and should be published in the various Alvas Atmimim. Rebbe went into a little bit of an introduction that normally Rashi's inyan is Pshuta Shel Mikra. And if Rashi learns Pshat, when Rashi quotes a quotation from a Chazal, there's no need for Rashi to tell us who is the man da'ama that said this thing. Because for us to understand Pshuta Shel Mikra, it doesn't make much of a difference who said it. In this week's Sedra, we have 3 places where Rashi refers to Tanoim who said this Pirush. So it's something very obvious that we have to understand why Taka does Rashi do it. So here the Rebbe says that a while ago he requested that it would be a good idea to compile a list of all the Rashis in the Torah wherever Rashi quotes a man da'ama. In other words, wherever Rashi quotes a Tano or an Amoire by name. The Rebbe says he doesn't know why it wasn't done yet. He says it's not a hard thing to do, especially that he didn't ask that it should be compiled and together with it to give reason why Take Rashi quotes specific man da'ama in every specific case. All he's asking for is to compile a listing of the Pirush Rashi where this is done. And then later people already will come across and give answers. But here the Rebbe got into, he says this is something which wasn't done, and though he requested it for many, many times. And the same the Rebbe says applies to other inyanim which he talks about, and unfortunately he says they are not fulfilled. The Rebbe got to an inyan which says which is negated community here. This is regarding the election of the Rabbanim which took place a while ago. And the Rebbe says, again, I'm going to try and be as accurate as possible, but I'm only human, and I know everybody learns shetlach, so to speak, in every word which was said, but I'll try and relate basically the general idea. The Rebbe says it was something unheard of that a community was, use the expression, Zolleifem, should run for such a long time without a Rav. The Rebbe says normally, what the attitude should have been, as it's customary in all Kehilos B'Yisrael, in all Jewish communities, says what's customary is that the group of Yidden who are loimdim, and those who understand properly what a Rav has to be, they are the ones usually that get involved, and they are the ones who get involved to pick a Rav. He says, but unfortunately this did not happen. And he says he started getting letters, and all different type of letters, why he lets this happen, that the community is running without a Rav. The Rebbe used the expression, Poinani Mikola Sokai. He said he stopped doing whatever he was doing, or whatever he thought, the Rebbe says, whatever he thought he has to be doing, or whatever he thinks he has to be doing, and he got totally involved in this inyan. And he says, thank God there was an inyan of elections. The first 2 Rabbanim were picked, and then a 3rd Rav was picked. And he says, then there were those that came up with an idea to postpone the effectiveness of the Rabbanim until Elul. The Rebbe says this is an unheard of thing. The election of the Rabbanim took place in Iyah and in Sivim, and prior to that, and here they want to postpone it for a period of months. What is the reason behind it? The Rebbe says there are those people who are also appointed on various positions, and when they could not produce what they were supposed to produce in their areas, what they began doing was to spoil what others are doing, to break what others are doing. So naturally they would want to postpone the Rabbanis. Sure, they would want to postpone the Rabbanis, Focus feeling that when they have a period of 4 months ahead of them, they will be able to break it totally. And again, this is something which is unheard of. This is when there are people who are given various appointments and they have to do their appointments, and if for whatever reason they are not successful in their areas, that doesn't mean that they should go out and interfere with others who are trying to accomplish good things. And here the Rebbe expressed himself regarding the council. The Rebbe says that having elections is something which should be. The Rebbe said when he was a child in Cheder, he says he was raised in a house where his father was a Rav and his uncle was a Rav. So there were these type of discussions in the house. So the Rebbe says that there was a discussion in the house was that we see human nature is very strange. A person would come and he would ask a shaila. If this piece of meat, for example, is mutar or asa, and he would be told that it's asa, he would be told that it's forbidden. Person wouldn't think twice. He would swallow the psak of the Rav and walk away. And at times it may mean a pretty big loss. However, when one has it in Torah with the other, and he loses it in Torah, even the amount of money which is talking about is a much smaller one than which he lost in the shaila of the meat. He initially begins complaining right away. He begins to complain and he begins to scream and he's unsatisfied and he's very unhappy. He's very unhappy to the extent that he's not happy with the psak of this Rav, and he tells to the person who's having the argument with, come, let's go to another Rav. Why is this so? Because the explanation on it is a very simple one. It says when a person loses a certain amount of money when he asks a shaila and isn't a heter, so he lost. Okay, he could swallow it, and he swallows it. However, when it's not in Isser v'heter, but it's in a din Torah, din amaminus, what bothers him is not the fact that he lost it. What bothers him is that the other person got it. The other person's gain is what hurts him, not his loss. And the same attitude, the Rebbe says, is reflected when we see certain people who are supposed to be involved in community work and have their appointments in community work, and still at the same time we see a very strange attitude to the extent that they weren't involved, they didn't encourage the election of the Rabbanim, and now they're trying to break other things. And this, the Rebbe says, is totally not the proper thing. And what happens in the end result? The end result that it leads to pirot halvavos, and it leads to machlokes. And machlokes is something which is asar al pi Torah. There's no justification in any way for any type of machlokah. And then the Rebbe says, usually what happens is people try to pull him into it and say that he said this, he said something else. But they don't have it in writing, so they say it, orally, that he said this or that. He expressed himself. He used the English expression. He has enough troubles from other areas and from other inyanim, and there was no need for him that these inyanim should also interfere and bring him agmas nefesh. And then the Rebbe says they got into a new habit, is they quote people who are close to him. In other words, his secretaries. Secretaries obviously know what his wish is. So Mamela, they quote them. Rebbe says he has told his secretaries, people, his maskirim, at numerous occasions, that they have no right to paskin shailas. That's not their department. Rebbe says the Friedeke Rebbe used the expression, had breite plaitzes, means broad shoulders. And we see from his activities in all areas. Nonetheless, he himself did not paskin any shailas, and none of his secretaries paskined any shailas. He says there was one exception. There was one secretary to the Friedeke Rebbe who did paskin shailas. He was a Rav. He was a Rav even prior to the arrival of the Friedeke Rebbe into the United States. And mainly he was a Rav. He paskin shailas. But otherwise, there is no authority to anyone in his office that's looking for power. That's what he said. He's looking to dictate or for power. He says they have an alternative. If they want to be in his office, his secretaries, then they are not authorized in no way to paskin any shailas or to dictate power or anything related any of these inyanim. And here the Rebbe referred to the famous Sama. There's a Sama that says that nobody could pass Shailas, only Rabbanim. And even a Balabas could know how to learn very well. When obviously that Sama was talking about a Balabas who may think to pass Shailas, it's a type of Balabas, and has smicha and knows how to learn. But if he's not a Rav, he's not a practicing Rav, then the Sama refers to him with an explanation that Das Balabatim, the opinion of Balabatim, is Heipach Das Torah. It's contrary to Das Torah. Das Torah is only from a Rav, from a Balabas. Here the Rebbe says he's requesting from the Rabbanim, being that until things will quiet down, it's only a matter of a Hira Shah, a temporary request, that when the Rabbanim paskin a Shaila, he says he's not referring to the type of Shaila when a woman comes to ask a Shaila in Halacha, but he means inyanim that are related to these matters, that the Rav should always include in the Psak, Meheichon Dantuni. In other words, what is the source of his halacha? Where did he derive his psak from? The Rebbe says, was involved in situations where he asked the Rabbanim this question. He asked them, Meheichon Dantuni, and the response from the Rav was a very weak one. So again, the Rebbe says he didn't accept it, so he answered him again and again, until finally it was proven that the Rav Taka did not have a proper source for his psak. Memela, so he's asking the Rabbanim at least for temporary request, at least for the next couple of months, that should always include in their Piskei Dinim, Meheichon Dantuni, what is the source of their halacha? Where did they derive it from, and on what is their psak based on? And the Rebbe spoke about this inyan at length. This is the general inyan which the Rebbe spoke about, and again kept on requesting that they expressed themselves. The Rebbe says, this is the Shchuna, this is the neighborhood. Friedeke Rebbe. The Rebbe says, Geld, money wird nicht kontrollieren, will not control this Shchuna. What will control this Shchuna? Achdus. And only Achdus, total unity, this is what will control this neighborhood. And again the Rebbe got in that there's no union of being a Don Yechidi, nobody can judge himself. It's only the Rabbeinu Shalom that can be a Don Yechidi. And when it comes to judging matters, we always have to have several Rabbanim. And the same thing when the source of money for the Rabbanim cannot be from one individual or something like it, because then there's no bigger sheicha, there's no bigger bribe than this. This is outright bribery, and this is in no way permitted. And again, getting back to this inyan, the Rebbe again requested about the Rashis, to accumulate a list of all the Rashis where Rashi quotes a Manda Amma, and Rashi says something in the name of somebody. In today's Farbrengen, the Rebbe learned a Rashi, which he also was learned already many years ago by the Rebbe in the Farbrengen. Also, the Rebbe, while talking about these things, he also said that he would appreciate that the Rashis, which are suggested, in other words, where people are raising questions in a Rashi in Chumash, it should be a Rashi which he did not learn yet, not something which he already explained in the previous Farbrengen. But nonetheless, in this specific inyan, in today's Rashi, though it was explained in the previous Farbrengen many years ago, there are still inyanim which can be added on. There's a Rashi in this week's Sedre, where the pasuk concludes in Matos-Masei, where the Torah concludes the journeys of the Yidden, right before Shlishi, Kapitel Lamed Gimel Pasuk Mem Tes. Pasuk says that the Yidden traveled. Vayachnu al Yarden, they rested on the Yarden, mi Beis HaYeshimos ad Ovel HaShittim. From Beis HaYeshimos until Ovel HaShittim, where was this Ba'arvis Moav, in the plains of Moav? So Rashi tells us, Kan Lomdach Shir Machne Yisrael Yud Beis Mil. Here the Torah teaches us what was the territory that was occupied by all the Yidden? There was the Machne Yisrael. Machne Yisrael means the area which all the Yidden, when the Yidden were traveling, they took up a certain amount of space. They were traveling for all the years in the Midbar. What space took up the entire area which the Yidden rested on? So Rashi says it was an area of Yud Beis Mil. Why? Because the Torah tells us that they rested from Beis HaYishimos until Avel HaShittim. What is the area? If we were to go out and measure, what is the distance from Beis HaYishimos until Avel HaShittim, we will see that this is 12 mil. And Rashi goes on, the Amar Rabbi Baba Chana, quotation from Rabbi Baba Chana. Rabbi Baba Chana, the Rabbi says it seems like it was a Tane, not an Amayre. He says, L'di Chazali Hahu Asche. He says that he saw this place. He was in the Midbar, where the Yidden were, and he saw the area, and he measured it, and it took up 12 mil. A very strange thing is happening here. First of all, why are we told at the end of the camping, after they traveled for 42 journeys, there were Matos-Masei. So always the Torah tells us where they rested. Name of a city. These were Taka cities in the desert, but they were cities. In other words, they were not really developed cities, but still when they came to a city, they were able to purchase water, they were able to purchase other things. It was a city where they camped. Always the Torah refers to the city by name. This is where they rested, and this is the city. Torah doesn't say from where till where. Here it comes to the last of all the journeys. This is what the Torah tells us it was from Beis HaYishimos until Avel HaShittim. And why does Rashi have to get involved in telling us that Rabbi Baba Chana saw it and he measured it? What is this negaya here? Truth is that the inyan of Machne Yisrael was already mentioned several times in the Torah. And still, wherever it was mentioned, and Rashi says Pshat in these Psukim, Rashi never got involved in telling us what is the size of the Machne Yisrael. And here Rashi does. Rebbe is learning as follows. This is the last one of all the journeys. It's the final journey. From here, where are the Yidden going? The Yidden are going into Eretz Yisrael. So as long as they had Moshe Rabbeinu with them, Moshe Rabbeinu was paskin and gold the shilas for the Yidden. What is it negeya, the stretch of the Machne Yisrael? This is negeya lagabe carrying on Shabbos. It's negeya lagabe carrying on Shabbos that within the Machne they were allowed to carry. Outside of the Machne they were not allowed to carry. So as long as they had Moshe Rabbeinu with them, there was no problem. They would have any shayla, they would ask Moshe Rabbeinu. Being now that this is the last of the Matos-Masei, now the Yidden are already about to enter Eretz Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu was not going along with them anymore. So here it's most appropriate for the Torah to tell us, you should know that what was the area, the shear of the Machne Yisrael, the shear of the Machne Yisrael was Yud Beis Mil. In other words, from Beis HaYishimos until Avel HaShittim. Rabbi says, Rashi is in France, saying Pshat in these Psukim. He's saying Pshat in Psukim and describing an area which happened thousands of years earlier. Happened before, when Yidden were in Eretz Yisrael, before the Bayis Shenim, before the Bayis Rishon, before the Yidden entered Eretz Yisrael altogether. And Rashi is giving explanations on the length, on the stretch of an area which happened in those days. So there's a question arising, how does Rashi come to in other words, to get involved in saying what kind of a stretch was it from Beis HaYishimos until Avel HaShittim? So Rashi says you should know, it's not my own. There was a Tana by the name of Rabbi Baba Chana. And Rabbi Baba Chana was the one that went and measured this area, and he said, L'redi chazali ahu asre. He took off time and went out of his way and traveled and journeyed through the Midbar and went into the Midbar which the Yidden walked through thousands of years before him, and he measured this area. Why take Rabbi Baba Chana? Rabbi says we find an interesting thing regarding Rabbi Baba Chana. Rabbi Baba Chana was always involved in measuring. There's another Gemara. Gemara tells us that Rabbi Baba Chana said that he saw the site where the Bnei Kairach, the children of Kairach, did Shuvah, and where they proclaimed Moshe Emes v'Teras Emes. So we see that this was Rabbi Baba Chana's inyan. With another Gemara, his inyan was going from looking up ancient sites and explaining them and exploring them. So Mamela Rashi is telling us, don't think that it's Tamazach. Who said it? Rabbi Baba Chana said it. And Rabbi Baba Chana is authentic and known that he would do research in these type of matters. Mamela accepted that this is the stretch of Machne Yisrael, and the stretch of Machne Yisrael was Yud Beis Mil, and the Torah tells us that Mi Beis HaYishima is had Avel HaShittim when the Yidden camped, and this was the last one of their journeys. Because here the Torah is letting us know another ring. In this Sedre, the Rebbe says we have two more times where Rashi quotes names of Tanoim. Another one is in Parshas Matos, Kapitel Lamed Aleph, Pasuk Yud Zayin. When the Yidden came back from their war with Midian, the pasuk says, "Va'ata hirgu kol zacha batav, v'chol isha yedas ish lemishkav zacha haroigu," to kill the male, and any woman which was yedas ish lemishkav zacha should also be killed. So Rashi quotes the last word from the pasuk haroigu and says, "Lama chazar va'amar lahafsiko inyan." Why is there another repeat of the word haroigu? The pasuk started already. V'ata hirgu kol zacha. Why does the Torah again say haroigu? This is a pause. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. This is the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel. So why does Rashi have to get involved again in quoting Rabbi Shmuel? He says this is very simple. You know why Rabbi Shmuel? Rabbi Shmuel is the one who's teaching us all various methods how to learn psukim. How do we say every day in davening? Rabbi Shmuel Aleima, b'shloishes middos hatayra nedrashes. So who is the one that really introduced all the different methods how to learn pshat in the pasuk? It's Rabbi Shmuel. Kal v'chaymer, gzeira shava. So here, it's like not one of the shloishes middos, but it's another way how to learn pshat in the pasuk. Memela, that is why Rashi is quoting here Rabbi Shmuel. There is a third Rashi in this week's Sedre, where Rashi quotes Rab Meir, right here in Pasuk Yutes, Kol Hoireg Nefesh. Rashi right away begins Rab Meir Oimer. Why is there a need for Rashi here to mention Rab Meir? This the Rebbe didn't explain. He said, it has an expression, Tein lachacham v'yech kamoid, leave it up to the wise, and he will find reason for it. He will become yet wiser. Regarding the Mishnah and Pirkei Avos, today, according to those who have the custom of saying Pirkei Avos not only between Pesach and Shavuos, but Pirkei Avos during the entire summer weeks, we begin again with the first Perek. Pirkei Avos, Rabbi says, in general, is Mila de Chasidusa. It's in Yonim of Chasidus. What do I mean by Chasidus? In other words, in Yonim of Lifnim Mishuras Hadin. Something which halacha does not require us to do. It's beyond the call of duty. In other words, we're not really obligated to do it, but if one wants to do in Yonim Lifnim Mishuras Hadin, then he should follow what the Chazal tell us in Masech Avos. Masech Avos begins with Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai. Moshe received the Torah from Sinai, and Masorah Yeshua is related to Yeshua, v'Yeshua l'Skenim, Eskenim l'Neviim, and Neviim Masorah l'Anshe Knesses HaGdolah. Hey Mamru Shloisha Dvarim, v'Mesunim Badin, Asus Yog La Torah, v'Midu Talmidim Harbe. Then the Mishnah begins with a quotation of one of the Tanoim that was Mishiyarei Knesses HaGdolah. He was from the leftover of Knesses HaGdolah. In other words, we know there was an union of Anshe Knesses HaGdolah. He really was not a member in the early founding of the Anshe Knesses HaGdolah. He was one of the remainers of the Anshe, one of the later ones. This is a very interesting thing. Mishnah begins, Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai. So from Masorah Yeshua. So from Yeshua there's no quotation, from the Skenim there's no quotation, from the Neviim there's no quotation. From the Anshe Knesses HaGdolah in general, there's also no quotation. Shimon HaTzadik, who was from the Shiyare Knesses HaGdela, at the way end of the Knesses HaGdela, who Hayayim al Shleisha Dvarim Eila, Maimed al HaTeira Val Aveda Val Mos HaSadim. Why doesn't the Mishnah quote anything from any of the prior ones that related Torah? Torah was going on from generation to generation, beginning from Moshe to Yeshua to all the Zkanim to all the Nevi'im, and all the Nevi'im related it finally to the Anshe Knesses HaGdela. The Anshe Knesses HaGdela, there's a saying, but also nothing more than that. From the Nevi'im we don't quote anything, from the Zkanim we don't quote anything, from Yeshua we don't quote anything, from Moshe we don't quote anything. Just to say the Kabbalah Satayra, and after the say the Kabbalah Satayra, we right away get into the Mishnahs begin. The second Mishnah begins with a quotation of Shimon HaTzadik, who was Mishiyarek Knesses HaGdela. The Rebbe is learning. He says as follows: in the days, what is Pirkei Avos? Pirkei Avos is basically inyanim of Lefnim Mishuras Hadin. Why Lefnim Mishuras Hadin? Because Asus Yog La Torah. What's the pshat Asus Yog La Torah? We're making the boundary to Torah. In other words, the Chachamim have added on things. We should refrain from doing certain things, even though these things we are allowed to do. But why shouldn't we do them? Because if we get involved with these things, then we will ultimately be Oyvan and Isser of Torah. In other words, the Torah is like, the Chachamim have like set boundaries. The Chachamim have set boundaries, and if we adhere to these boundaries, we will be careful and not be Oyvan in Yonim, of it, which are in Isser min Torah. This is actually what the Mishnah is saying. What did they say? Asus Yog La Torah. This comes as one of the major introductions from the Anshe Knesses HaGdela. What did they arrange? Asus Yog La Torah. Rebbe says the Yidden that lived in the days of Moshe, Yeshua, the Zekanim, the Nevi'im, they did not need any Siyag La Torah. Those Yidden, if they were told you're not allowed to do this thing, and you would remind them on Moshe, or you would point to Yeshua and tell them that Yeshua was the one that said that you're not allowed to do this, or Moshe was the one that said you're not allowed to do this, they would immediately stop from doing it. The Rebbe says, we find in those days, how many problems were going on in those days. There was the Nina of Avodah Zarah. There was tremendous problems which were going on in those days. The Rebbe says, for those individuals, the seyog, in other words, the boundary, also wouldn't help. So, memanashach, are we talking about a person who's a proper person, and and he's about to commit something wrong, and you're stopping him from it, and you're telling him, Moshe, Yeshua, there's a Zekanim, whoever said you're not allowed to do this thing, the person will hold himself back from it. If you're talking about a person who is given to be under the influence of his Yetzirah, and he's ready to commit a Nissa, even if you will put boundaries and give him the advice of Milad de Chasidusa, which this is what Pirkei Avos is all about, it wouldn't help these people. The Rebbe says that the Alter Rebbe explains in Torah a very interesting thing. That in the olden times of the Beis HaMikdash, the Gilui of Getlichkeit, the revelation of Getlichkeit was very big. Therefore, in the contrary, was also very strong. Nowadays, that there's not such a revelation of Getlichkeit, there's not such Gilui Elokus as it was in those generations. Therefore, the contrary to it is the Matos-Masei is also weaker. And with this, the Alter Rebbe explains another thing. The Rebbe explains that in those days, we find Amaratzim. People were very not learned. I mean, we're not talking about a person who was unfortunate that didn't have education like we have many individuals today who are Nebachtaneukish and Nishbu. But in general, amongst Klal Yisrael, there were outstanding Talmidei Chachamim, and on the contrary, there were tremendous bitter Amaratzim. Today, we don't find such gap. Why? So the Alter Rebbe explains, we don't have these outstanding Talmidei Chachamim either. We don't have such people who are so great and knowledgeable as the Tanoim and the Amoraim, and it was Bimei HaNeviim, the outstanding personalities which they had. We don't have that. Memela, we don't have the contrary, the large packets of Amaratzis, which was going on in those days. We don't have that as well. Memela, the Rebbe says, in those days there was no need for it. However, in later generations became weaker. Memela, there were those individuals that by introducing Siyog La Torah, introducing boundaries to Torah, this would refrain them from being Oiva and Averis. And this is what Pirkei Avos is all about. The Rebbe again referred to what he spoke about in the Beis Tammuz Dike Farbrengen, and spoke about it today again, that it's extremely urgent request that those areas and those cities or countries that do not have a Chabad house as yet, that a Chabad house should be founded there. And wherever there are existing Chabad houses, the Chabad houses should be enlarged. And that the Rebbe says by a Chabad house, we simply fulfill Vehemidu Talmidim Harbe, and we fulfill Vasu Siyog La Torah. And above all, it's Milah de Chasidusa. This is what Pirkei Avos is all about. In a Chabad house, this is what, but in a Beis Chabad, this is what's really fulfilled in Yonam of Chasidus. This is what's really practiced there and what's really done there. And therefore he again repeated his request that those places where there is no Chabad house as yet, one should be founded, and then again where there are existing ones, they should be expanded and enlarged and so forth. The Rebbe also reminded, and an inyan which he spoke about in previous years, that the 9 days should be utilized on making siyumim, completion of mesechtes. During the 9 days we can make a siyum on any mesechta, and then B'negei Tisha B'Av or Erev Tisha B'Av in the afternoon there are specific halachas, what we are allowed to learn and what we are not allowed to learn. So the siyum on mesechta that's made should be such in accordance to halacha on an inyan which we are allowed to learn, on an inyan which we are allowed to learn on Erev Tisha B'Av or Tisha B'Av. Regarding the inyan in Rambam, in the Hilchas Beis HaBchira, the Rebbe says he spoke about it at previous occasions, and when we look through the Rambam, we see a very interesting thing. The Rambam tells us in detail how all the kelim of the Beis HaMikdash was supposed to be made. And he explains it extremely in fullest detail, very precisely, very specific about every one of the kelim which were in the Beis HaMikdash. There's one exception, which the Rambam does not explain, and that is the Oren. The Oren which contained the Luchais. If we look through the Rambam will tell us that there's a mitzvah to have an Oren, and the Rambam adds on the halacha that the Oren was not allowed to be carried on a wagon. The Oren had to be carried on the shoulders of the Leviim. However, the details of erecting the Oren, the Rambam omits. Rabbi says in general, there's a machlokes between the Rambam and the Ramban. If the making of each one of the Klei HaMikdash is considered a specific mitzvah, the Ramban learns that each one is a specific mitzvah. The Rambam does not. The Rambam learns that it's all part of the mitzvah of making the Beis HaMikdash. And being that we have to make a Beis HaMikdash, the Beis HaMikdash is perfect when it's made with all of its kelim. So all the kelim the Rambam explains. Regarding the Oren, the Rambam doesn't. Very strange. And therefore the Rebbe says there's the Ragatshava who wishes to say that all the kelim, the Beis HaMikdash had a halacha of the klei shoris, meaning that's a kelim which was used for service in the Beis HaMikdash. Shoris is Meloshin Sheirus, Meloshin service. However, the Oren, the Rambam says, the Ragatshava says, being that the Rambam does not explain it as one of the klei HaMikdash, when he explains all the Klei HaMikdash, we are bound to say that the Oren is not considered a Klei Shoris. So the Rebbe explains, what does it mean? He says as follows. What was the Oren? The Oren contained the Luchos. What are the Luchos? That's Torah. We cannot say that Torah is there, we put Torah someplace because of something else. If we were to say that the Oren is also if the Rambam was to include the erecting of the Oren as one of the details of the erecting the Beis HaBchira, of erecting the Beis HaMikdash. Then it would be that the Aron is also a prat in Asiyas HaMikdash. We can't say that. The Aron Take adds more Kedusha into the Beis HaMikdash, no question about it. The Aron is Torah. Torah is so high and outstanding in itself and in its own rights that we can't say that we put Torah someplace because of something else. If we were to say that the making of the Aron is a mitzvah, a prat of the mitzvah, in erecting the Beis HaBchira, erecting the Beis HaMikdash, kommt achos, then that would mean that we are learning, that we are utilizing Torah, we are using Torah, which is what the Aron is, to make a kosher Beis HaMikdash. It is not so. Torah is higher than anything else. So that is why the Rebbe is learning. The Rebbe says he spoke about it at previous occasions. And that is why the Rambam explains in precise detail all of the other Klei HaMikdash. However, the Aron, the Rambam doesn't explain. Being that we're talking about the Mishnah and Ovis, of Amidu Talmidim Harbe, that we have to increase, to see that there are many Talmidim to learn Torah. The Rebbe says, being that we are still in the summer months, it's an appropriate time again to still talk about the type of camp a Jewish child should be in. And if parents realize that their children are in such type of a camp which is not Altaras HaKodesh, which is not where the child is not receiving a proper Yireh Shamayim Dike Chinuch, then the Rebbe says it's the obligation of the parents to take the child out of this camp and put him into a type of camp which is a proper camp where a child does receive an Altaras HaKodesh Dike Chinuch, and something which is through and through with Yireh Shamayim. And here the Rebbe again spoke in general to parents that B'negei Chinuch, tremendous inyan, which is a major importance in Chinuch, when we want to see success in Chinuch and have nachas from our children, the Rebbe says, that can be when parents act as a living example from whatever they're demanding from the children, they themselves do it. And when the parents live up to such standards, that whatever they're demanding from the children, they do that themselves, this is a tremendous source for nachas and satisfaction from their children. The Rebbe should give. Rebbe concluded that everyone should have nachas, bane, chaya, mezayna, and all of these things should be bekula revicha. Again, the Rebbe concluded that being that we are under 3 weeks, it's a proper time for Avodas Hashem, and everything should be done to correct the Galino Me'artzenu. And being that the Galino Me'artzenu, why did we go in Golas? Because of Mipnei Chatainu, because of our sins. That is why we have to do everything that is only within our power to decrease the Mipnei Chatainu. Memela, this will take away the Galino Me'artzenu, and the Rebbeinu Shalom will take us out of Golas. As the Rebbe referred, he said he's talking already many occasions, many Farbrengens, Ad Mosai, how much longer will the Rebbeinu Shalom keep us in Golas and take us out of Golas with Mashiach Tzidkenu?